text came in around 1 in the morning. Looking back, we must have already been uneasy for the mere vibration of the phone to have woken us. The night outside was deep and quiet, freckled only by the chatter of crickets and the prickle of stars, but immediately we were wide awake, hearts thumping in the dark. I knew in that moment that I would remember this night forever. Even then, details were already being carved into my memory. The tremble of our mosquito net in the exhale of the night, the smell of sunlight on our sheets. I laid in the dark while Brian read out loud, "War has started in the state capital. Be vigilant." My husband Brian and I moved to Sudan in May of 2009, just a couple of years after a peace agreement was signed, ending decades of civil war. Our jobs in the development organization sent us to one of 3 contested areas where some of the world's most impoverished people live. We were working with a tribe to help develop their unwritten language so that they could more fully participate in social, educational, and political spheres from which they had been excluded. When we first heard rumors of rising political tensions, I honestly wasn't that concerned. We'd made it through the first national election and the secession of the entire southern half of the nation with no conflict. Surely this too would blow over. But it didn't. Instead, the rumors darkened. A new brigade of soldiers just moved up from the south. My uncle says he saw 6 tanks behind the mountain, waiting, just in case. I heard that there are 2 Antonovs stationed as near as Damazin. Even those who shrugged off the uneasy talk couldn't always hide their anxiety. Just like everyone else, when planes passed overhead, they would freeze mid-sentence and look to the sky before breaking into nervous laughter. So when the text came in, I wasn't surprised. I'm embarrassed to say I was actually a little excited. I immediately started thinking about what a great blog our evacuation was going to make, as melodramatic theme music started playing to my own inner narrative. Brian slipped on his headlamp and walked next door to confer with our neighbors. I started rummaging around the house, trying not to wake our 4-month-old daughter, Annabelle. I shuffled through the go bags that had been packed weeks earlier and straightened the things we would have to leave behind, as though the government soldier who kicked in my front door would take a moment to appreciate my housekeeping before ransacking the place. I washed the pots and pans we had been given as a wedding present and dusted off the shelf full of books that had been dragged around the world with us. I sorted through trunks of odds and ends that we had collected in our time in Sudan, weighing volume against sentiment as I pondered what to take. A strand of black and white beads an old woman had given Annabelle was tucked into the suitcase. The tiny cups that had held many long conversations worth of hot mint tea were not. At one point, I stepped off the back porch and was surprised to find that the night was already bristling with unfamiliar sounds. Shrill whistles and distant cheers were welcoming rebel soldiers on their march north. Rough engines were coughing loudly down the road, though at the time I did not know that I was hearing tanks. And mere feet away, just beyond our rickety bamboo fence, I heard footfalls, hundreds of them, moving quietly past in the thick darkness. In that moment, I wasn't afraid. I knew that these were rebel soldiers who welcomed our presence among the people they were fighting for, but something about the almost complete silence of those boots on the path near my house chilled me like cold water running down my back. And for the first time, I knew that this just wasn't a game anymore, and my excitement wavered. Dawn came lazily, as though it were completely unaware of the drama unfolding beneath it. The pilots of the Cessna Caravan, coming to evacuate the few remaining expats in town, instructed us to lay a white sheet at the end of the airstrip to signal that it was safe for them to land. A friend with a Land Cruiser offered to give us a ride out of town. Annabelle and I were bundled into the front seat, and I was careful to keep her little foot from brushing the barrel of an AK-47 wedged between the driver and passenger seats. Our friend told everyone to keep their eyes on the sky. "If we see a plane, I'll slam on the brakes and everyone get out and run," he said. I imagined running through the tall grass with Annabelle strapped to me in her baby carrier, and was thankful to have ignored local sensitivities and put on pants instead of a skirt that morning. As we jostled down the dirt road, I realized that the town had changed overnight. Large trees that usually shaded old men drinking coffee now shaded young men, weighed down with weapons. Checkpoints, once manned by soldiers too drunk to notice who was passing by, were now angrily guarded by soldiers whose eyes missed nothing. And the road once walked by graceful women carrying buckets of water was now flooded with people running for their lives. We're so alike, I thought, as we drove past a woman with a heavy bag on her head and a baby bobbing on her back. But our eyes met as we passed, and my stomach reeled. We are nothing alike. My bag held a dark blue passport and money. Hers carried enough food for a day, maybe two. I was carrying my baby to an airplane that would fly us to safety. She was carrying hers to the middle of the bush. A clearer sense of reality settled in during those final moments in Sudan. I suddenly felt like I was being pulled away from someone I desperately needed to see one more time, but couldn't find. Every face on the road became familiar. Every voice drifting in the open window became that of a friend's. But there was no time to say goodbye. By the time the plane landed, I felt numb. We were herded through the blast of hot engine air and into our seats. With very little ceremony, the plane taxied down the airstrip and lifted into the air. As we gained altitude, I pressed my face up against the foggy window and looked down. I could see the long road back into town, worn circles of dirt around thatched roofs, and just barely, I could see my white sheet at the end of the muddy airstrip. From that height, tanks and soldiers blended mysteriously into earth and grass, and the world looked quiet, peaceful even. I felt like we were running away from nothing. For a moment, I felt surprised by a sudden rush of exhaustion, but then I remembered the long night behind us. Annabelle was already baby snoring, still snuggled up against my chest. Leaning my chair back slightly, I sensed the weighty nearness of something significant, something akin to grief or guilt, and I savored the fleeting moments before it arrived and made itself at home in my heart. I did not know then that the Antonovs were only minutes behind us. I did not know that they would drop bombs over the airstrip we had just left and over women and children hiding in a dry riverbed near town. I did not know that cell phones would be cut off that night, draping a war zone in silence. I did not know that familiar faces would fade into mere statistics in UN refugee reports full of ugly words like hunger, rape, and shrapnel. I did not know then, at least not fully, that I was leaving behind much more than books and kitchenware. On that morning last September, I didn't know many things. So in the quiet drone of the little plane, I held my husband's hand, kissed my baby's head, and fell asleep.